So one of the, you could say, major differences between us as Catholics and our Protestant brethren deals with something called anthropology, which is just a fancy way of saying who we are, right? Who we are as human beings, our human nature, right? And many of our Protestant brethren hold an understanding of the human being as being in a state of what they describe as total depravity due to original sin. And so the imagery or the analogy that's often used to describe this state, which was thought to originate from Martin Luther, is that we as human beings are actually dunghills, right? There's other words we could use, but we're going to use that one today, right? And what that means is there's nothing in our nature after the fall, after the garden, that is, in a sense, authentically good. We are, in a sense, nothing but evil piles of, I won't finish that sentence, right? And to read it charitably, and it does come from a charitable place that they're trying to express, it's meant to express our absolute and total dependence on Christ. That we cannot do anything on our own when it comes to our salvation, right? And so grace in this view, what we get from the resurrection, right? It's like snowfall that comes from the sky and covers up those dunghills. And after the resurrection, all of us, because of this grace won at the cross, appear like beautiful hills covered in snow, right? And it's all very picturesque until a shovel reveals the truth, right? Or until the rays of the sun beat down on that snow and melt it away. In contrast, the church teaches that our human nature is extrinsically good because we are made in the image and likeness of God. Now, we lost that likeness to God in the fall because our natures were wounded by that wound of sin. But we've always retained the image, because to be in the image of God is to have intellects and wills. It's the ability to know and to love and the freedom to choose, right? So the problem, in a sense, with this Protestant notion is that it actually places limitations on God. All he can do, in a sense, is cover up our depraved human nature and not radically transform it. And I don't know about any of you, but I don't simply want to be a dunghill, right? I don't want God's grace just to descend upon me like snow and only remain at the surface, simply cover up the stains that sin leave. No, when I stand before the Lord one day, I want him to see how profoundly the graces that he sent me throughout the entirety of my life actually penetrated to the very depth of my soul, that those graces transformed me. And so as I was thinking about this, how do you kind of make an analogy to explain it, I guess? The only thing I could come up with was the difference between pity and mercy. Now, often those two words are used as synonyms, right? But if I asked you, would you rather somebody pity you or have mercy on you? Right? Those sound different, right? I don't think you would choose, I just want to be pitied by my friends, right? I don't think that's how we feel. And the snow is kind of like pity. God, in a sense, feels bad for you, right? And so he covers up the sin. And in a sense, we're forgiven. But if we really think about it, both God and us would know that the sin is still there, right? However, what God offers to us as Catholics isn't pity, it's mercy. And the difference is in the word itself. Mercy comes from the Latin misericordia, which is a compound word. Miserere, which means misery, and cardia, which means heart. And if you put them together, right? The definition you get, the word literally means to have a heart in misery for the other. That goes well beyond pity. And today is Divine Mercy Sunday. And so Jesus wanted to have a heart so much in misery with us, you could say, that he allowed his own heart to be wounded with a lance. And that wound in his divine heart, it poured forth not pity, but mercy. And it poured directly into the wounds of our broken hearts. And as we remember in the scriptures, by his wounds, we are healed. And so it's no mistake then in our gospel today that the very first gift that the apostles receive on the day of the resurrection is the power to forgive sins, to forgive them, to blot them out, not simply to cover them up. Because that's exactly what the sacrament of confession does. It restores and transforms. It's mercy. It's not pity. And so we might ask ourselves, what does that transformation look like? Well, I was on retreat pretty much all this week, and for one of the meditations that I sat in on, the priest who was leading it shared a story about Pope St. John Paul II that I thought really kind of expressed this. And so as the story goes, apparently there was a priest on the way to the Vatican for a private audience with the Pope. And as he's walking along, he recognizes one of the many beggars in the area as a fellow priest that he actually studied with in seminary. And so he comes up to him and begins trying to catch up with him. And the beggar priest told him that he had basically fallen off the deep end and left the priesthood, and basically told him, I'm lost. Just leave me alone, right? Let me go back to my begging. And so the priest leaves him there and goes on to his private audience with the Pope. And when he has a chance to speak for a moment with the Pope, he asks the Pope to please pray for his friend, the priest turned beggar. And so a few hours later, this priest gets a phone call from one of the Pope's secretaries, basically inviting him to a private dinner with the catch that he needs to bring that beggar priest with him. And so, as luck would have it, he goes and he finds his friend. He brings him back to his hotel, convinces him to come to the private audience, gives him a change of clothes, gives him a chance to get a shower, and then off they go to dinner. And as the dinner was nearing completion, the Pope dismisses the priest and everybody else who was at the dinner so that he could speak to the beggar alone. And some time passed, some more time passed, and finally the doors opened and the beggar came out with tears streaming down his face. And the priest, kind of stunned, asked him what happened. And the beggar said, "The Pope asked me to hear his confession." And the beggar told the priest, or the Pope, I'm no longer a priest. I'm just a beggar, right? How could I even possibly hear the confession of a pope? And the Pope looked at him and said, "My son, once a priest, always a priest. And who among us is not a beggar before the Lord? I too come before the Lord as a beggar, asking for the forgiveness of my sins." The beggar told the Pope he's not in good standing with the church, right? And the Pope assured him, as the Bishop of Rome, that he could institute him and reinstitute him right then and there in order to hear his confession. And so the beggar told his priest friend it had been so long since he had even heard another person's confession that he forgot the words of absolution. The Pope actually had to help him with the words. And so thinking about all this, the priest simply asked, man, you were in there for a while. Surely the Pope's confession didn't take that long. And the friend said, "No, But after I heard his confession, the Pope heard mine. After the confession, the Pope gave him his first assignment as a newly restored priest, and that assignment was to go and to minister to the homeless and the beggars on the very steps of the church from which he just came. The priest was sent. He had been transformed by the power of this sacrament, and he had been sent to those who need the Lord the most. My brothers and sisters, God simply doesn't leave us where we are. He doesn't simply cover us up with his grace. The grace penetrates to the deepest part of who we are. It's rarely instantaneous, maybe like that story, but over time it breaks us down, it transforms us, and then we as disciples are sent out. So what should we make then of this analogy of the dunghill? I would just simply offer this, that while it's true to some extent that we carry within us all of those sins that we've committed, they don't define us. At the resurrection, you could say, the Lord gave his priests a plow, the sacrament of confession. And that plow slowly, but it surely works on us. It works on the good and the bad. And over time, the tilling of the soil of our hearts becomes less and less, you could say, dramatic, right? Less and less painful even. And the dung, which is our sin, is beaten into the soil, and it slowly transforms the soil into something fertile, where the word, if you remember, which is the seed, can be implanted with us. And ultimately, we produce 60, 30, 60, and 100-fold. Maybe that's why some of the church's greatest saints were also the church's worst sinners, because they had more dung in their life that could be beaten into the soil and made to be exceedingly rich and fertile. But either way, nothing happens without the plow. And so if you truly desire the fruit of the resurrection, of what we celebrated last week and what we continue to celebrate this week, it is waiting for you. But it's waiting for you in the confessional.